Hello, welcome to 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. In his 1939 film, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, director Frank Capra portrays idealistic Jeffrey Smith, played by Jimmy Stewart, in a bare-knuckles battle with the entrenched Washington establishment as he attempts to draw back the curtain on the political chicanery going on in the Congress. Even today, the film is considered one of the best films ever made, an allegory of good over evil. Fast forward nearly 70 years, and a new book, Awakening the Sleeping Giant, by my guest today, Congressman Curt Weldon, who represented Pennsylvania in the House of Representatives for 20 years from 1987 to 2007. The book documents the political empowerment of America's 1 million firefighters, EMS, and first responders, the direct result of Congressman Weldon's relentless campaign to draw attention to the needs of firefighters and other responders in the country, his comrades. In his book, Awakening the Sleeping Giant, Congressman Weldon chronicles his life in the fire service as a firefighter, fire chief, Pennsylvania state fire instructor, and volunteer training director for one of the largest counties in Pennsylvania, and how he took the firefighters' battle to Washington, D.C. In his book, Congressman Weldon spins tales filled with tragedy and pain, emotion and passion, humor and goodwill, intertwined with true stories of his own life as a firefighter, fire chief in his hometown of Marcus Hook, taking them to the hallowed halls of Congress, where he confronted a government bureaucracy that had been unresponsive to the needs of career and volunteer firefighters throughout the country. Welcome, Congressman, to
Thank you,
30
Rick.
Minutes.
Great to be here.
You're a hard man to catch up with. I'm delighted that you were able to find time to come and visit with us. I think you said earlier this is you've been to the studio before.
Right.
Over the years. It's quite different, I think, than it was back then.
And I applaud Radner for having this for the citizens.
Although I compared your story with Frank Capra's movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, was that an overreach? Because I do see a parallel between that story of an individual against the establishment and your dogged campaign on behalf of your fellow firefighters and first responders, as well as some of the other campaigns you waged while you were in Congress.
Well, I wouldn't compare myself to that Frank Capra
You don't
story.
look like Jimmy Stewart.
No, but I did my job, and I have no regrets for what I did. And as a firefighter, fire chief, and Delaware County Fire Training Director, all as volunteers. When I went to Washington, I was appalled that the government wasn't paying attention to our first responders. So I put together a plan, I executed the plan, and 30 years later, that organization that I created remains the largest bipartisan organization in the Congress. So it proves that government can work.
Yes.
And the model that we created can be used by any group that wants to affect change in Washington.
Is it $14 billion that's been allocated over the years?
When I went to Congress, police were getting $4 billion a year locally to help them, bulletproof vests and all.
Yes.
Firefighters were getting nothing. In fact, the total appropriation was $40 million a year. Each year we lost 120 police officers. Each year we lost 120 firefighters. There are no volunteer police. 85% of the firefighters are volunteers, like they are here in Radnor. So I said, there's something wrong here. You know, if we ever had to replace the 32,000 fire departments with all paid, we would bankrupt America and bankrupt our communities. Because, you know, and I'm not against paid firefighters, they're good friends of mine. So we put together legislation in 2000 after we built the mechanism that I created, documented in the book. And we created a new program that neither Bush nor Cheney wanted. It didn't matter. I had the Congress behind me. And that program has appropriated about $10 billion over the last 13 years. Every of the 32,000 fire departments in the country, probably 30,000 have gotten at least one grant. I know Radnor has. And most companies have gotten 3, 4, or 5 grants. They're not political. They go right to the department based on needs, and they're there to help protect the lives of the first responders.
It's great work.
Thank you.
Understanding your passion, and you lived it, what was your primary motivation in writing the book? Just to call attention to, or to chronicle the story
it was three
how
things.
it was done?
It was, first of all, to tell the story of the firefighter in America. Older than America itself. The fire service, dating back to Ben Franklin and before, has protected every community. In every community, 32,000 have had fire departments. We take them for granted. We give them $5 on Tag Day, We give them an annual donation, and that's it. And we don't realize these people are largely family members, their husbands and wives, they have kids, they have full-time jobs.
And we're losing them.
We're losing them big time. And so my goal here was to tell their story. Tell their story through my eyes, having gone from a local firefighter, fire chief, to Washington, where I basically took on the bureaucracy in a positive way and ended up with Joe Biden, Al Gore, John McCain, Steny Hoyer, Paul Sarbanes, Susan Collins, all being my co-chair. And that organization is now 30 years old. It's the largest and most successful bipartisan organization in Washington. It works. It's unlike the Congress today, members, because I wouldn't allow partisan politics to get involved. And the firefighters and first responders have benefited. And your show is at an appropriate time because we turn on the TV and all we're seeing are floods and hurricanes.
Yes.
And who's doing that? Responders. Now, we donate money to the Red Cross and to Salvation Army, and I support that. But they don't give money to the first responders. They don't help the family members who lose their own homes while going in to help protect other people. That's why the second thrust of my book was to announce the organization of One World for Life. One World for Life is a new NGO internationally that I set up, announced it 2 years ago. I set it up legally this year. And its total focus is to unify and empower the 25 million firefighters and first responders worldwide. And that's moving aggressively right now. The last 2 chapters of my book document that. And the third purpose was to tell the story about why I'm not in office any longer.
That will be an interesting story.
It will be a barn burner.
In the book, you tell stories about some of the ways that the firefighters called attention to their cause in Washington. Tell me about some of the things they did.
Well, I'm a teacher by profession.
There was a day when apparatus showed up in Washington.
They didn't just show up.
It was an incident.
We planned it.
It was an incident in an office?
I'm a teacher by profession and believe that the best learning is
experiential
learning. And to make my point, now a couple of things happened fortuitously. I didn't plan them. Like in my first term in office, Jim Wright, the Speaker's office, catches on fire. I just happened to be 2 doors from that. It's 6:30 at night. So being a first-term congressman, but also a fire chief, I go to the fire. Get down on my hands and knees, bang the door open, and go in to look for staffers. Come out, no staffers were in there, and realize this building housing 1/3 of the Congress was a fire trap. It wouldn't pass any building code in America. So while we're mandating sprinklers and detectors on every building in every city and every town, the federal buildings were totally out of compliance. And so, realizing I couldn't put the fire out because the extinguishers hadn't been charged, there was no hose in the hose station, violation of every life safety code, I went outside and the microphones were stuck in my face. And as a first-term congressman, I said, these buildings are fire traps. They should be shut down. Well, obviously that got some attention.
Yes.
Now, the story you're talking about was when I couldn't get the administration because of the lobbyists for the industry of communications, the big lobbyists for NBC, CBS. They didn't want to give up frequency spectrum so we could expand the communication system for first responders. And at every disaster we had, police and fire couldn't talk to one another because they were on different frequencies or they had different bands of systems. We passed the legislation, but lobbyists kept getting administrations to push back the implementation date. So I put the word out. I need 30 fire trucks at the Capitol. I got 300. We brought them down to Washington on a Wednesday morning, put them in RFK Stadium. I grabbed Steny Hoyer, the number 2 Democrat leader, my co-chairman, took him down to RFK Stadium, put him up in the front seat of a truck from his own district. I got up in the front seat of the truck from my fire company, and we drove 2 abreast down Capitol Street. We surrounded the Capitol building at noon. I had 2 aerial ladders raised in the Capitol parking lot with a flag in the middle, and I had a tractor trailer with a microphone on top of it. And at 12 noon, I gave the signal, and 300 fire trucks laid on their air horns and sirens. And you could see the people running out of the office buildings like rats, wondering what's going on. This is before 9/11, wondering what's going on. Well, a politician can smell a microphone a mile away. So they all ran for the podium and for the aerial ladders, wondering what's going on. So Steny and I are up there, and they said, what's up? And we said, we want your support to move this legislation to create this interoperable system for the country. 100 members of Congress jumped on the stage. That became the impetus, and today, right now, AT&T is implementing the National Interoperable Communication System. So sometimes you have to take the government and go like this. And if you don't do that, logic doesn't always do it.
But you weren't able to do that with two presidents because you didn't have the support of the Clinton White House or the Bush W.
No, Clinton was leaving office. We created a grant program, and he said no new grant program. He wouldn't support it. I didn't need him. I attached the grant program as an amendment to the defense bill. So when Clinton signed the defense bill into law, which he had to do every year, that program became law. Then Bush comes in, and his budget director didn't want to fund the program. So I called Mitch Daniels, the budget director, down to my office. Mitch was the most recent governor of Indiana, and a friend. And his staff advanced the meeting, and they said, Weldon is setting you up because he's got 70 members of Congress stuffed in his office. So he stopped at a hose station in the Rayburn building and picked up a portable fire extinguisher and carried it into my room. And he said, I think I'm going to need this. And I said, you are going to need it. Well, we had a nice meeting. Ended up, we got our first $100 million. And in the past 13 years, as we just said, we've appropriated, the government has appropriated about $10 billion directly to fire departments across America, much like we were doing for police. And that money is money to help people to continue to volunteer. I'm a fiscal conservative. If we ever had to replace the 1 million volunteers in America with all paid firefighters, you'd bankrupt our country. So I want to keep those volunteers volunteering, like I did. You know, they have full-time jobs, they have families, they have commitments. So we need to at least help them with equipment and personal safety protection. And that's what the grant program does.
When you were in Congress, you had a reputation, I think the word was troublemaker.
I was a troublemaker. I took the CIA on. I threw the station chief out of a meeting in Moscow. I didn't know he was a station chief at the time, but he lied to me. He lied to my delegation. We were investigating U.S. involvement in the theft of Russian IMF and World Bank money. The allegations were $5 billion. And he lied to me. He was portraying himself as a State Department employee. So I convened the delegation in a neighboring room, Democrats and Republicans. I said, what do you want to do? He lied to us. And they said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to kick the guy out of the meeting. So I came back and I pounded my fist on the table and I told the guy to leave. I didn't know who he was at the time. I found out a year later he was the station chief in Moscow. And a year after that, the Justice Department indicted Bank of New York officials for being involved in a scam to take well over $5 billion of Russian IMF and World Bank money. You know, if you're going to do the right thing, then that's what Congress needs to do. So call me a troublemaker. I wish we had 435 troublemakers. Because if you had 435 troublemakers in the House and 100 in the Senate, then bureaucracy, you would remove this deep state that really exists today.
Yeah. What's the difference between the time you were in Congress and you were reaching across the aisle, you were getting things done in a bipartisan way? What's happened that we can't do it today?
A couple things happened. Back when I was in and the Democrats controlled the Congress, there were a number of Democrats from southern states who really weren't Democrats in ideology. They were conservative Democrats. So it was easy to form coalitions with them. There was also a bipartisan coalition on defense among Democrats. Over time, and it was partly caused by both parties, when Newt Gingrich went after Speaker Wright, who was a good and decent man, and embarrassed him out of office because they claimed he was getting royalty payments for his book. And that started. Tom DeLay exacerbated that on the Republican side. And then you had a number of Democrats like Chuck Schumer do the same thing on the Democrat side. And basically, camaraderie broke down. And today, members don't want to cooperate. They don't want to collaborate. And then you've got the outside forces, the big money, the big lobbyists, what Trump calls the swamp. And they are pushing members into doing things they really don't want to do. By and large, in the 20 years I was there, the members I met in both parties were good and decent people. They were people that wanted to do the right thing. But you get all this outside pressure, and then on top of that, you get the deep state that answers to no one, and you got problems. Unless you're willing to ruffle the waves and ruffle feathers and take on tough issues.
In your opinion, can Trump deliver on his promise to drain the swamp?
Well, it's going to be great. It's going to be very difficult because you're fighting both parties. Both parties have the same swamp background and same swamp mentality of making money off the government through lobbyists and through all kinds of other giveaway programs. That remains to be seen. But regardless of who's in the White House, the Congress needs to take on this deep state that exists that really is bad for both parties. Look, I have 5 kids. I have 5 grandchildren. I want America to succeed. I'm a Republican, but I've admitted I voted for Democrats in the past. My liberal friends can't say the word, oh, I voted for a Republican. I can. I voted for Jimmy Carter for president because he pardoned Richard Nixon. And when I confront my liberal friends, I said, all right, tell me somebody who you voted for. No. We need to have people think about who is the best candidate based upon what they've done. Now, we also need members of Congress that aren't afraid to take on the system. And that means you have to make enemies. When I wrote the book Taking on the CIA in 2005 publicly, I knew I was going to pay the price for that. My book, Countdown to Terror, was based upon the fact that we had no policy to deal with Iran, and it was going to lead to war. Now, that was written in 2005. What's the headline today in the news? Isn't it Iran?
Yes.
And we don't know what to do.
You were prescient in that.
2005, the book came out. The total focus was we have no policy to deal with Iran, and that's going to lead to war. And today we're there, 9 years later.
What else are you predicting?
Well, I'm North Korea. I led both delegations in North Korea. We had a chance to resolve that in the Bush administration. The hardliners, like Condi Rice, didn't want to talk to the North. She's the one that referred to Kim Jong-il as a pygmy. Yeah, and as a result, now we're paying the price for North Korea.
I read that in your book, that Condi Rice was against your second trip, I think it was.
She was against all the trips.
But, well, she stopped your second trip. She wasn't able to stop you the first time, but she stopped your second trip.
She did. That's exactly right. She wouldn't stop the third because I went to the president. I went to Colin Powell, and they agreed with me. We were there to support the president. We weren't doing any, ulterior negotiations. Yeah. And we took the State Department. An interesting person you might want to have on the show is Tong Kim. Tong Kim was the lead negotiator for the State Department for 16 trips before mine. He was the translator for Bill Perry, for Madeleine Albright, and for Bill Clinton. He went with both of my delegations. You ought to have him on the show. He's done my oral history for me.
Can he talk?
He can talk he lives in America.
No, I mean, is he free to talk?
Oh, he can talk, yeah. He will tell you, and there's not me, this is not a guy that worked for me. He was career State Department. He will tell you what we did and what we could have achieved and weren't allowed to achieve and what he thinks is happening today. He did a 3-hour interview for my oral history at Westchester, and it's very provocative. And again, his entire career was working for the State Department.
You were teaching at Westchester?
No, I went to school at Westchester. I donated my entire archives.
Tell me about that, the archives.
I donated 480 cases of files and documents and graphs that are one of a kind. A lot of it's sensitive. A lot of it's going to embarrass people. And
so it's locked up.
It's locked up. And then Westchester came back to me and said, would you want to do an oral history? They have one of the premier oral historians in America, Dr. Charles Hardy. He might be a good person to interview. He was president of the National Association of Oral Historians. And he does the interviews. I'm not involved with them, except the ones interviewing me. I've done about 60 hours of interviews. So everything in my life is now recorded with the documentation to back it up. Now, I knew people would try to challenge me, so I took Dr. Hardy to Russia. We did 20 hours of interviews in Moscow with Russian leaders. So no one in the U.S. can say, well, Weldon's not telling the truth, because now I have the Russian people speaking firsthand. Tong Kim, the lead interpreter for the statement, did a 4-hour interview in our archives. Former head of NATO did a 4-hour interview. Democrat members of Congress did interviews. Former CIA operatives did interviews. It's all recorded, 100 hours right now, and it's going to be open to the public when Westchester finishes the cataloging.
I hadn't planned to ask this question, but I have to. Given your background and the fact that you are so contemporaneous with what's going on right now, what about North Korea and this standoff?
It's a problem. The North Koreans look at me as someone they could at least trust, because I went there, I sat with them, I negotiated with their lead negotiator, Kim Gae-gwan, for 18 hours. We could have resolved the North Korean issue in 2004. And on my website, the documents that I proposed then, which Colin Powell put on his website, a 2-part, 10-point plan, would have resolved, and they would have given up their nuclear program. Because you see, the agreed framework that Clinton negotiated in 94, it was a piece of garbage. There was no way to enforce it.
I know.
And that's why they have nuclear weapons today, because we were sold a bill of goods.
Yeah.
Now today, it's a problem. I mean, this Kim Jong-un is an irrational person. In fact, before the election was held, I reached out to the North Koreans and offered to go in to bring Otto Warmbier out. I knew he was there. And I could have gone in, but I couldn't get a nod from the Trump administration. I didn't want an endorsement, just a nod. And I would have gone into North Korea for my 4th trip there, but I didn't. And unfortunately, Otto Warmbier was tragically beaten and persecuted. And
What I've read, what I've heard is that even since the 90s with the Clinton détente, the North Koreans simply want respect.
they do.
It seems simple and probably difficult for us to understand.
I will give you my whole philosophy summed up in 3 words, and my hero in going into politics was Ronald Reagan, a former Democrat. And he dealt with the Soviets. And his 3 simple priorities were strength, consistency, and candor. You want to be strong, that deters aggression.
Right.
You want to be consistent, and that means you want to respect people, but not play them as we did over and over again with the Russians and North Koreans and with Iran. One day they're our friends, the next day our enemies. And besides being strong and consistent, you have to be candid. When they do something stupid, you have to confront them. You can't pretend it didn't exist. I mean, I look back at 1996 when Yeltsin's popularity was at 20%. He was a corrupt drunk. But Clinton and Gore wanted Yeltsin to be reelected. So this is true story. Back it up. You can Google it. We sent consultants to live in the presidential hotel in Moscow to run Yeltsin's campaign. So Yeltsin won. And the Russians knew that he was a corrupt drunk, but they knew he was the president. America won it. So he was elected. I mean, it all comes down to how you treat people, the respect, whether it's North Korea or China. Now, I'm not saying they don't do bad things, because they do. You know, and part of my entire first 10 years in office was going after the Soviet stupidity. The fact that they stored weapons in America, as was documented in the book The Sword and the Shield by Dr. Christopher Andrews.
They stored weapons in
the U.S., yeah.
They
in
did?
the U.S. and Europe, absolutely. Read the book The Sword and the Shield, the Matrokin Files. Matrokin was a former KGB operative, head of the KGB archives. When he moved the archives, he stuffed notes in the floorboards of his home and went to Britain, tried to get asylum in the U.S. We turned him down. He went to British intelligence. They accepted him. And after they interrogated him, they turned him over to Dr. Christopher Andrews, a scholar at either Cambridge or Oxford. He wrote this book, which you can get in the library, The Sword and the Shield, The Secret Files of the KGB, the Matrokin Files. And in there he documents the part of what they did was move equipment and materials into parts of the U.S. and Europe. Now, they found devices in Europe. We never found devices in the U.S. Now, I went after the agencies in that to say, what do you know about this? They never denied it. The FBI called it a serious concern.
These devices weren't nuclear, or were they?
We don't know what they were. We also interviewed, at that time, Dr. Stanislav Lunev. He had been an operative for the KGB at the embassy, Soviet embassy in Washington. And he testified that one of his jobs was to pre-locate sites where they could drop materials. We never got to what they were. In the case of, I think it was Switzerland or Austria, they actually found small ammunition devices and hand weapons that were stored exactly where the Matrokin file said they were stored. So there were things that the Soviets did that we should have held them accountable for. It's like when Gore got a report from the CIA about Chernomyrdin, who was the number 2 in command with Yeltsin. Remember the Gore-Chernomyrdin Commission?
Yes.
The CIA said he's a corrupt guy. He's a criminal. So Gore wrote the word BS, only it wasn't BS. He wrote it out and sent it back, said, I don't want to hear this. He didn't want to hear what we knew about Chernomyrdin, because they wanted Chernomyrdin and Yeltsin to be in power because we could work with them. Well, eventually those kinds of double standards come back to haunt you. And that's a lesson we haven't learned. So North Korea today, I'm worried. I'm severely worried because he's pushing the limits. It's 10 years after I was involved. He has those no-dong and typo-dong missiles now that are much more accurate and long-range, and he has the ability to produce small, miniature nuclear weapons.
But he doesn't win.
Now, what he will do, my prediction, he will not attack anyone with a nuclear weapon. He will try to launch a nuclear warhead on the top of a missile and detonate it in space. And if he does that, it creates something called EMP, electromagnetic pulse. I was the author of the EMP legislation, created the EMP Commission. I just did an op-ed in the Hill magazine on this commission last week. That will fry all the electronic components below it. So the cars will stop. Everything will shut down. Your communications will end. So you bring a world-class economy to its knees. He can do that. That's my fear of what Kim Jong-un will try to do.
But what does he accomplish? He'll be taken out.
Well, I think in the end, that's what Trump is trying to say to him with his belligerent talk, and
Yeah.
he may be too belligerent, but he's trying to say, and he's trying to berate him, saying, look, you keep this up, we will take you out.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised you haven't done that yet. I mean,
Do you credit, again, this wasn't planned, but we're into it. Do you credit Trump with being what he claims he is, and that is a skilled negotiator, deal maker?
it's too early for me. I don't know Trump personally. I've never met the guy. I did vote for him, but I don't know. Well, only time
He
will
better
tell.
be,
History will tell.
because what he's doing is
But look, I can
certainly
tell you, I
unpredictable
served
and
with
unprecedented.
4 or 5 different presidents, and I could sit here and tell you story after story.
I'm sure you could.
That would
And I hope
embarrass
you will someday.
the country if they knew what really happens behind closed doors.
Let's get back to the book in the time we have remaining. What has this cadre of 1 million in America, firefighters, first responders, and so on, what have they done with the clout that you were instrumental in?
They now have the
creating?
respect, as George Bush put on the back of the cover of my book, everybody respects them. And they get the kind of attention like this interoperable communication system.
Yes.
These urban search and rescue teams that are going all over the world, that's all created by the firefighters.
Yeah,
now remember, I want to make this point. I am not taking a dime of money from this book.
All proceeds
Every
are going
dime
to
is going
the-
to firefighters in the U.S.
to
and
the
worldwide.
organization
To
you're
One
creating.
World for Life,
Right.
which is a nonprofit, and then to firefighters all over the world.
Mm-hmm. But to what extent is money a solution to the problem of declining volunteers? In your era, and mine, families, it was expected. The father, the grandfather, the kids were all volunteer firemen, or women now. That's not the case anymore. Why? What's broken down?
I think
The
that
pride,
whole,
the camaraderie.
That's right. That whole inner pride of you've got to put back. I come from a large family, 9 children. Neither parent went to high school, but they told us you have a responsibility to put back into the community.
Yeah.
My father was proud. He never went on welfare, even though when the company was out and he was on strike, he went and got another job someplace. My mother relied on the church to help the 9 go through life in Marcus Hook. We've, to some extent, lost that. In our inner cities, we don't have volunteer firefighters anymore. And that's a shame.
Yeah.
Because it's not just, and this is part of what the book's about, a fire department, you have an excellent fire department here in Radnor. A young boy or a young girl that doesn't have 1 or more parents can learn lessons of life there. And that's where I grew up in the firehouse, even though I had good parents. I learned how to do it, and I learned the respect that you get from joining an organization that's built on unity and built on protecting each other. If every kid had a chance to, it's like going through the military, only not that same regiment, but if every kid had a chance to go through that kind of a process, the country would be better off.
Yep. Another time we can talk about what's happening and what has happened to the education system in this country since you were a teacher, an educator, and I think probably still are in a way.
I taught at all levels, and I thought my job in Congress was to be a teacher for my constituents. And that meant going against the grain, which is what you have to do.
The book, again, is Awakening the Sleeping Giant. It is available on Amazon, Kindle, and your website?
Well, yeah, you can get it. Just Google Amazon Books, my name, and it'll pop up.
What is your website? You mentioned a website earlier.
Well, my site is Curt Weldon, www.curtweldon, but also we have a oneworldforlife.com or .org website, so they can go on any of those. And we'd love to have volunteers that would like to join One World for Life, because right now everyone's a volunteer, no one getting paid. And we're doing exciting things, and the goal here is very quick. Firefighters have the same mindset all over America. They're givers. You know what? I've been to disasters all over the world. They're just the same.
Yes.
So my goal is to unite the givers, not the politicians who worry about their next elections. The givers, whether they speak English or Farsi or Arabic or Korean, they have the same mindset as firefighters. If I can unite them, then that unity will bring a new dimension worldwide that can help us solve some very big problems down the road.
Well, this is a second step. The money was the first step. The book is the second step, and you have a few other books.
A couple more
in
books
the works.
coming out that watch out for. They're going to be barn burners.
Okay. I can hardly wait. Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
My guest today has been Congressman Curt Weldon, and his new book, Awakening the Sleeping Giant, available on Amazon and Kindle, or his website, or a website again called One World.
oneworldforlife.org.
Okay. Until next time, this is 30 Minutes. I am Rick Anthony. Take very good care of yourselves.